The chandeliers of the Bower Hall threw a soft gold across the ballroom, and for a long moment the room looked exactly the way the brochures had promised. Men in tailored jackets stood near the bar. Women in long dresses moved from one cluster of conversation to another. A jazz quartet played from a low side stage, careful not to drown out the murmur of the crowd. It was the kind of evening Boston put on when it wanted to remind itself that it was wealthy, charitable, and well-mannered. None of those three things would survive the next 10 minutes. At table number 14, near the side stage, a single dad named Corbin West was waiting for a person he did not know. He was 29 years old, tall, with dark brown hair cut short, and the build of a man who had carried boxes for a living before he had learned to read electrical schematics. His navy suit was old. He had pressed it himself that afternoon. There was a thin scratch on his right wrist from rerouting a stage cable earlier in the day, and he had hidden it under his cuff so it would not show. He sat very straight, the way men who do not feel they belong sit when they want no one to notice they do not belong. Around him, 3 co-workers were already smiling at something that had not happened yet. Dante Parker, 31st, the hotel's manager of guest experience, kept checking his phone. Vanessa Clark, 28, who handled internal communications, held her phone at chest height as though she were filming the room. Hillary Moore, 30, the event assistant, laughed too quickly each time someone else laughed. They had paid attention to every corner of the gala except the corner where their conscience used to be. A side door opened. A young woman stepped through, slightly out of breath, her gray wool coat darkened at the shoulders by rain. Her chestnut hair fell loose. The strap of an old leather bag was wound tight in her hand. She looked, in that single second, like a woman who had walked through the wrong door and was preparing to apologize for being there. The hostess at her elbow gestured toward table number 14. The young woman nodded, and she began to walk. Dante stood up. He raised his glass. He pitched his voice loud enough that the bar could hear him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, with a smile that had been rehearsed in front of a mirror, "Corbin's blind date has arrived." A small ripple of laughter moved through the nearest tables. Vanessa's camera lifted. Hillary covered her mouth. Dante carried on. "We thought about this for a long time. We wanted to find someone who would really suit him. Someone simple. Very simple." The laughter spread. The young woman stopped walking. She understood in less than 2 seconds that she had been led into a joke before she had even been offered a seat. She did not turn around. She did not flinch. She simply waited and watched the man she was supposed to be meeting, because his next move would tell her everything she needed to know about the Bower Hall. Corbin set down his glass. He stood. He did not look at Dante. He did not look at Vanessa or Hillary. He stepped past them, walked to the woman in the wet gray coat, and pulled her chair out for her the way a man pulls a chair out for a guest he respects. Then he turned, slowly, and looked at the table he had been seated at all evening. "The one who should be ashamed tonight," he said, "is not her." The room did not laugh after that. Not yet. Not quite. But the silence had begun. To understand why Corbin West did not sit back down, you have to walk back through the small apartment on the edge of the city where the lights came on at 4:30 every morning. The kitchen there was narrow. A row of unpaid bills sat on the counter, neatly stacked, the way Corbin stacked everything else in his life. The refrigerator carried a child's drawing of a fox with a smile too wide for its face. On the chair near the door, a small backpack waited, already packed, already zipped. Corbin moved through the apartment quietly. He had learned to make breakfast without waking his daughter until the moment she needed to be woken. He made oatmeal. He cut a banana into 7 small pieces because 7 was the number she liked. He filled a small thermos with warm milk. He did all of this without thinking, the way a man does what he has done for 2,000 mornings. In the next room, a 6-year-old girl named Bonnie West was still asleep, her hand resting on a worn stuffed fox named Rusty. The fox had been a gift from her mother. Her mother had been gone for almost 3 years. Bonnie did not remember everything about her, but she remembered the way her mother had laughed, and she remembered that her father had not laughed in the same easy way since. When Bonnie woke, she sat up. rubbed her eyes, and did the thing she always did first. She checked that Rusty was still in her arms. Then she checked that her father was in the kitchen. Then she got up. The day could begin only after both of those checks were satisfied. While he braided her hair badly and with great care, Bonnie asked him a question she had been saving since the night before. "Daddy," she said, "why do you never go out with anyone?" He paused, just for a second, with a small green elastic band in his fingers. He told her he was busy with work. She did not believe him. She looked at Rusty for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, "Mom would not want you to eat dinner alone all the time." He did not answer that. He finished her braid. He kissed the top of her head. He walked her to school in the gray morning light. At the Bower Hall, Corbin was the man no one noticed until something stopped working. When a microphone hissed during a wedding, he climbed the ladder behind the curtain and rerouted the cable. When a chandelier flickered above a charity dinner, he was the one balancing on a folded ladder long after the last guest had gone home. When a guest suite ran cold on a winter night, he was on the roof, in the snow, with a flashlight in his teeth, fixing the unit himself. The kitchen staff knew his name. The housekeepers knew his name. The bellhops knew his name. Dante did not. Dante's group had a private joke about Corbin. They called him the man who only dated his toolbox. Vanessa had said it once at a staff lunch in front of 7 other people, and she had said it loudly enough to make sure Corbin heard. He had heard. He had said nothing. He needed the job. He needed the health insurance. He needed the steady paycheck so that his daughter would never know what it felt like to have a father who quit. So he had carried his silence the way men like him carry many things. Carefully. Without complaint. Without showing the weight. A week before the gala, the staff of the Bower Hall received an internal memo. A company called Monroe Crescent Hospitality was preparing to acquire the property. The current management had one last evening to make an impression. Anyone who shone that night might be retained. Anyone who did not might find themselves looking for new work by spring. Dante read the memo twice. He smiled. He saw an opportunity, and the opportunity was not just about the new owners. It was about Corbin. In a quiet corner of the office, Dante leaned over Vanessa's desk and said the words that would change everything. "There is a charity activity at the gala," he said. "They are calling it the Mystery Dinner Match. Guests pay into the children's fund and they get paired with a stranger for dinner. Imagine Corbin sitting across from a woman who looks just as out of place as he does." Vanessa laughed. She liked the picture. She added Corbin's name to the list without asking him. Hillary, who happened to be standing near the door, asked whether this was going too far. Dante did not look up. "It is just a joke," he said. "He takes everything too seriously. We are giving him a social life." Hillary did not press the point. She wanted to keep her job. She wanted Dante to remember her name when the new owners arrived. She told herself it was only a small thing. Most cruelties begin as small things that someone refused to stop. That same week, in a high tower across the river, Adelaide Monroe was reading a culture report her advisors had prepared on the Bower Hall. She did not believe most culture reports. She had learned in her short time as the chief executive of Monroe Crescent Hospitality that culture was something a company displayed in framed posters and forgot about everywhere else. She told her assistant she would attend the gala personally. She told her there would be no red carpet, no introductions, no entourage. The assistant tried to argue. Adelaide cut her off gently. "If a place is only kind to me because they know my name," she said, "I need to know that before I sign." 2 paths had begun to bend toward the same room. A group of co-workers wanted to humiliate a single dad. The young chief executive wanted to see how a company behaved when no one was watching. And neither side knew the other was coming. The invitation card arrived at Corbin's locker on Friday morning. It was thick paper, embossed, almost too elegant for its own good. It told him that he had been entered into the mystery dinner match for the gala, and that his table number was 14. He read it twice. He thought it was a mistake. He almost dropped it back in the envelope and walked it to the front office, to be reassigned. That evening, Bonnie found the card on the kitchen counter. She held it carefully, the way she held anything that had her father's name on it. "Daddy," she said, "what is a blind date?" Corbin sat down at the table. He thought about how to answer. He told her it was when two people who did not know each other met for dinner so they could learn whether they wanted to know each other better. Bonnie thought about that. She turned the card over twice. She looked up at him. What if she is lonely too? He did not answer right away. He had taught her, before she could read, that no one should have to stand alone at a birthday party. He had taught her that the kindest seat in any room was the one beside the person no one else wanted to sit next to. Now she was using his own lesson on him, and he could not pretend he had not heard it. "Daddy," she said, more softly, "you do not have to marry her. You can just have dinner with someone who is sad." He laughed, but the laugh caught in his throat. Bonnie was 6 years old. She had been watching him for a long time. She had watched him eat dinner alone after she had gone to bed. She had watched him fall asleep on the couch with the television on. She had been keeping a quieter kind of grief than he had realized. He decided for her to go. He did not expect a romance. He did not expect kindness. He simply wanted his daughter to see that a man could lose someone and still be brave enough to sit across from a stranger. That was how a kind man walked into a trap. Not because he was foolish. Because his love for a small girl with a stuffed fox had made him forget that the world sometimes used the door of his decency as a way in. On the night of the gala, Adelaide Monroe was running late. She had stopped, on her way across the city, at a women's shelter that her company quietly funded. She had spent 20 minutes there, listening to a young mother who had just been hired into a hotel kitchen. By the time she got back into the car, the rain had turned heavy, and the gray wool coat she had thrown over her dress was soaked through at the shoulders. The driver suggested the front entrance. Adelaide asked him to drop her at the side. She wanted to walk in like a guest, not like an owner. She did not fix her hair before she stepped out of the car. She did not check her reflection. She wanted to know exactly what she looked like to people who did not yet know who she was. The first hostess she passed gave her a quick smile, and then, almost without meaning to, looked over her shoulder at someone better dressed. A young server nearly stopped her to ask if she had used the wrong door. Adelaide did not feel insulted. She felt informed. None of those small reactions on their own were unforgivable. Together, they were a map of how this hotel decided which guests deserved attention. The hostess at the ballroom door checked her name on a tablet and led her toward table 14. Adelaide assumed it was simply the next available seat. She did not yet know about the mystery dinner match. She did not yet know that a man with 3 co-workers was waiting to be made a fool of. When she stepped close enough to see the table, she felt the air change. Dante's eyes flicked over her wet coat and her old leather bag, and a small, careful smile appeared on his face. Vanessa lifted her phone half an inch higher. Hillary stared down into her water glass. Only one person at the table stood up when Adelaide arrived, and that was the man in the worn navy suit. She watched Corbin pull out her chair. She watched him do it the way he must have done it for his mother once, or for his late wife, or for any woman who had ever been given less than she deserved. There was nothing showy about it. There was only the quiet competence of a man who had been raised to treat strangers as guests in his life. Adelaide sat. She set her wet coat across the back of her chair. She decided in that moment that she would not reveal who she was. She wanted to see how far the joke would go before someone with power was willing to stop it. The first joke had been mild. The second one was not. Dante leaned back in his chair, swirled his wine, and said with practiced warmth, "Corbin, we know how humble you are. So we found someone who would not be intimidated by all this glamour." There was laughter from the next table over. People who did not yet understand the joke were laughing, because Dante's voice told them they were supposed to laugh. That was the part that would haunt Hillary later. Not the cruelty of 3 people. The willingness of 40. Vanessa added, in a stage whisper that was meant to be heard, "Honestly, they look like a match. Both of them are so unbothered by effort." More laughter. Hillary tried to smile. The smile came out wrong. Dante reached across to pull Adelaide's chair in. He did it on purpose, slightly off-center, so that she would have to shift it herself. Vanessa called out, with the same theatrical tone, "Careful, dear. The chairs here cost more than some outfits." That landed. The bar heard it. A man near the dessert station laughed loudly enough that it embarrassed his wife. Through all of this, Corbin had not moved. He sat with his hands flat on the white tablecloth. His jaw was set. The scratch on his wrist had peeked out from under his cuff, and he did not bother to hide it now. Then Dante did the thing he could not be forgiven for. He clapped Corbin on the shoulder, leaned in close enough for the camera to catch it, and said, "Come on, man. Do not be so tense." A single dad should be grateful when someone agrees to sit across from him. The laughter that followed was the loudest of the night. Across the ballroom, near the open archway that led to the children's lounge, a small girl with chestnut braids was standing very still. She was holding a stuffed fox by one paw. She did not understand what the man in the loud voice had said. She only understood that her father was not laughing, and that the woman in the gray coat was looking down at her own hands. Bonnie had learned, very early, what cruelty looked like. It looked like a room full of grown-ups laughing while two people were not. Corbin stood up. He did not stand quickly. He did not stand the way a man stands before a fight. He stood the way a man stands before a long winter when he knows he has already brought in enough wood. Dante had a follow-up line ready in his mouth. It died there. Corbin did not look at him. He turned to the woman in the wet coat. He pulled her chair in for her properly this time. He picked up a clean napkin and laid it across her place setting. He waved over a young server, the same one Adelaide had nearly been stopped by at the door, and he asked her, kindly, if she would bring a hot tea to the table. The server, who had served Corbin coffee in the basement break room 100 times, nodded as though she had been waiting all night for someone to behave like a human being. Corbin lowered himself into the chair beside Adelaide. He spoke to her, not to the table. "I am sorry," he said. "You did not deserve to be greeted like this." Adelaide looked at him. There was a small flicker of surprise in her eyes that she did not bother to hide. She had been protected in her short career by men who were polite to her because they had read her last name on a folder. Corbin did not know her last name. He had no folder. He was being kind to a woman in a wet coat who looked, by every signal the room had taught him to read, like she could not do a single thing for him. Dante tried to wrestle the moment back. "Corbin," he said with a forced laugh. "Relax. It is just a bit of fun." Corbin turned his head. His voice did not rise. "A real bit of fun," he said, "does not need someone to lower her face so that other people can feel taller." The laughter at the next table thinned. People began to look at one another. A few set down their drinks. The man near the dessert station who had laughed loudest cleared his throat and pretended to be very interested in his fork. Vanessa, sensing the air had turned, snapped, "You are acting like we committed a crime." "No," Corbin said. "I'm saying that she walked in here as a person, and you treated her like a prop." Adelaide did not move. She did not interrupt. She simply listened, the way a chief executive listens when she is trying to learn who in a room can be trusted with other people's dignity. Bonnie could not stay where she was supposed to stay. She let go of the arm of the children's lounge attendant. She walked, in her small blue dress, across the long stretch of patterned carpet between the tables of the most powerful people in Boston, holding Rusty by one paw. Several adults watched her come. Not one of them stopped her. Some part of them already understood that they had no right to. She reached her father's chair. She put her free hand on his knee. She looked up at the woman with the chestnut hair and the wet coat. Her voice was very small. "Daddy," she said, "why are they laughing at her? Did she do something wrong?" The room went quieter than it had been all evening. It was the kind of silence that does not happen in ballrooms. It was the silence of 40 grown adults being asked a simple question by a 6-year-old, and discovering that they did not have a single answer they could say out loud. Corbin knelt. He did not pick her up. He let her stand at her own height, because she was the one in the room who had earned it. No, sweetheart, he said. She did not do anything wrong. Bonnie nodded slowly. Then she did something none of the adults had thought to do. She reached into the small pocket of her dress, took out a folded paper napkin from her dinner box and held it out to Adelaide. The napkin was a little crumpled, but it was clean. When kids laughed at my old shoes, she said, Daddy told me not to believe what mean people say. So you should not believe them either. Adelaide took the napkin. The hand that took it shook, just slightly. She had not expected that. She had walked into the ballroom prepared for any number of corporate maneuvers. She had not been prepared for a small girl with a stuffed fox to teach her how to be brave again. Dante, behind them, muttered something about not dragging children into adult business. He had aimed it at Corbin, but the room heard it as the meanness it was. Corbin straightened. Something in his face had changed. It was not anger. It was the look of a man who had just been told, by his own daughter, that the line had moved, and that staying calm was no longer the same as staying silent. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The Varun was already listening. He kept one hand on Bonnie's shoulder. He looked in turn at Dante, at Vanessa, at Hillary, and then, slowly, at the surrounding tables, at the faces that had laughed, and the faces that had let it happen. My daughter is 6 years old, he said. She does not know who in this room is rich, and who is not. She does not know who has a title, and who does not. She does not know which dress costs the most, or which coat is the cheapest. But she knows one thing that a lot of grown people in this room seem to have forgotten tonight. You do not laugh when someone is being hurt. A few people set down their glasses. No one moved much. The jazz quartet had stopped between songs, and the leader, sensing the moment, did not begin the next. You thought you had set me up for an embarrassing dinner, Corbin said. I am not embarrassed. I am sitting next to a woman who was treated unfairly, and I am proud to be the one sitting next to her. What embarrasses me is working beside people who believe that a single father's loneliness and a stranger's appearance were small enough things to trade for a few minutes of laughter. Dante opened his mouth. Corbin lifted one hand, gently, the way a man asks for quiet at his own dinner table. I fixed the sound system in this hall, he said. I fixed the lights. I fixed the air conditioning when the suites get too warm. I fixed the things in this building that guests never notice are broken. But there are things in this room tonight that are not made of wires and metal. They are broken in a way that is harder to fix. And you all just showed everyone what that looks like. He paused. He was breathing carefully. His hand on Bonnie's shoulder did not shake. If a person is kind to you only because they know you have power, he said, that is not kindness. That is calculation. There was no response. There was nothing to say to that. Hillary was crying without sound. Vanessa had lowered her phone all the way to the tablecloth. Dante's mouth was slightly open, and his eyes were fixed on a point somewhere beyond the chandelier. The man near the dessert station who had laughed loudest had set his hand over his face. The woman beside him was looking at her own ring, as though she could no longer remember what she had been so amused by 10 minutes earlier. Corbin sat down. He did not look at Dante again. He picked up the small napkin Bonnie had given Adelaide, smoothed it on the table, and placed it back beside her plate in case she wanted it again. The master of ceremonies, an older man named Walter, stepped onto the main stage. He did not yet know what had just happened on the floor. He only knew that, according to his schedule, it was time to introduce the chief executive of Monroe Crescent Hospitality. He smiled into the microphone. He searched the head table where she was supposed to be seated. The seat was empty. The seat had been empty all evening. A small whisper rose around the executive board. The acting general manager of the Bower Hall went pale. Two senior directors leaned toward each other in a way that did not look casual. In the silence Corbin had created, a chair moved at table 14. Adelaide stood. She slid her arms out of the wet gray coat and folded it neatly across the back of her chair, the way one folds a thing one no longer needs. The black dress beneath was simple, elegant, perfectly fitted. Her chestnut hair fell smooth across her shoulders. There were no jewels. There was no announcement. There was only her, walking the length of the ballroom toward the stage, and the slow, dawning realization on every face that had laughed. Dante's color drained. Vanessa's lips parted. Hillary closed her eyes. Adelaide reached the stage. She handed Walter a small ivory card. Walter read it. He read it again. He looked up. He cleared his throat, twice, and spoke in a voice that was no longer quite steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please welcome the Chief Executive of Monroe Crescent Hospitality, Miss Adelaide Monroe." The ballroom did not move. Adelaide stood at the microphone. She did not begin with anger. She did not begin with the joke that had been made of her. She began the way a leader begins. "I came here tonight," she said, "to see how this place behaves when no one knows who I am." She let that sit. "I saw a number of things," she continued. "I saw kindness used as a uniform that some people only put on in front of important guests. I saw laughter used the way bullies have always used laughter, as cover for something that would not be allowed if it had to be said plainly. And I saw one man at table 14 who carried no title that anyone in this room respected, and who was, tonight, the only person here who behaved like a leader." She looked toward Corbin and Bonnie. Bonnie was peeking around her father's arm. "I will not need any more reports about the culture of this hotel," Adelaide said. "I have seen what I needed to see." The morning after the gala did not look the way mornings after scandals usually look. There were no cameras in the lobby. There was no press release. Adelaide had asked her communications team to keep the matter inside the building, because she had not come there to humiliate anyone in public. She had come there to clean a house she was about to own. An internal review was opened by lunchtime. Group chats were pulled. The mystery dinner match registration sheet was found. Vanessa's phone, which she had unwisely synced to her work account, contained a folder of clips she had been planning to send to a friend. Hillary, when she was called into the conference room, sat down before she was asked, and told the truth before she was questioned. By the end of the week, Dante Parker no longer worked at the Bower Hall. The decision was not framed as revenge. It was framed, in clean human resources language, as a misuse of his role as a guest manager to organize the public humiliation of a colleague and a guest. Vanessa Clark lost her position in internal communications, because internal communications cannot be entrusted to someone who has used another person's image as raw material for a joke. Hillary Moore was placed on a probationary review. Adelaide had decided, after a long talk with the human resources director, that someone who had panicked in the moment but confessed afterwards still had something inside her worth saving. The story was not allowed to become a story about three monsters. It became a story about how easily ordinary people can choose either side of a line. Corbin was called into the executive office on Thursday afternoon. He stood very straight in front of the desk, the way he had stood in front of every authority figure in his life. He had practiced what he wanted to say. He said it before Adelaide could begin. He said that he did not want anyone to lose a job because of something that had been done to him. He said that he had not stood up that night in order to win anything. He had stood up because his daughter had been watching. Adelaide listened without interrupting. When he finished, she answered him quietly. "You did not cost them their jobs," she said. "They lost their masks at exactly the wrong moment, in front of exactly the right person." She offered him a new role. She had been thinking about it since the night before. The position did not yet have a place on the organizational chart. She had drafted it that morning. It was called Director of Frontline Culture and Guest Integrity. It would include training the staff who actually meet the guests, designing the procedures for handling crises with dignity, and protecting any person, whether a billionaire or a part-time server, from the small humiliations that hotels are very good at hiding. Corbin did not answer right away. He thought about Bonnie. He thought about how he would explain a promotion that had grown out of a night he wished she had never seen. He told Adelaide that he did not want a reward for doing what any decent father should have done. Adelaide looked at him for a long moment. "Then do not call it a reward," she said. "Call it a responsibility. A place like this, Need someone who is willing to fix the things other people pretend not to see. A month later, the keys to the Bower Hall changed hands. The signs at the front desk were quietly replaced. The new training programs began on a Monday. Several long-serving staff who had been overlooked for years were promoted from within. Two of them were the young server who had brought Adelaide her tea, and a housekeeper who had once worked a double shift to cover Corbin when Bonnie had been sick. Corbin walked into the lobby on his first day in the new role, wearing a suit that was still not new, but cleaner, sharper, and worn like a man who had earned the right to it. Bonnie came by after school, holding Rusty in the crook of her arm, a small backpack slung over her shoulder. She had told her teacher, very seriously, that her father had a new job, but she had not told her what kind. She had kept that part to herself, because she sensed it was the sort of thing a family did not need to brag about. Adelaide met them in the lobby. She wore a navy dress with a soft neckline and no coat this time. The cool distance she had carried in her face, on the night of the gala, had thawed into something steadier. She knelt, the way she had not known how to kneel before that night, until she was eye level with Bonnie. "Are you still sad about how they laughed at you that night?" Bonnie asked. Adelaide thought about it. She did not lie. "Not as much," she said, "because someone stood up for me at the right moment." Bonnie pointed proudly at her father. "Daddy fixes things." Adelaide looked up at Corbin. There was something in her smile that did not need to be named yet. "I know," she said, "but this time, he did not just fix a room. He fixed the way the people in that room looked at each other." Corbin took his daughter's hand. Together, they walked through the lobby of the Bower Hall, past the same chandeliers, past the same marble floor, past tables where, only a few weeks earlier, a room full of strangers had laughed at a wet coat and a single dad. No one laughed now, not because they were afraid, because they had finally learned that the person you have decided to look down on may, in the end, be carrying the last of your dignity for you. That night, when Corbin tucked Bonnie into bed, she set Rusty between them on the pillow. She asked him the question she had not asked since the gala. "Daddy," she said, "did we win?" Corbin thought about it for a long time. He kissed the top of her head. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. "No, sweetheart," he said. "We just remembered who we were. Sometimes, that is enough." He sat there in the dim light long after she had fallen asleep, with one hand on the blanket, and the other one resting, very gently, on the foot of a small stuffed fox that had been waiting all evening to be held again. The chandeliers of the Bower Hall did not know any of this. They went on shining. They had been built to make a room look beautiful. They had not been built to teach a room how to behave. That, on a rainy night in Boston, had taken a 6-year-old with a stuffed fox, a young woman in a wet gray coat, and a single dad who had finally decided that staying silent was no longer the same as staying kind.